Hello, I'm Simon Lawson. Henry's explained a bit about my journey. I'm absolutely committed and devoted to building compassionate business models. I think we have a family business, and I'm absolutely certain that families and businesses have a great interface together. And we all love our families, but somehow when we leave them at home, we go and arrive at work and there's some sort of different values tend to happen. So I'm keen to how we get those to work together. So I'm going to ask you a question. Has anyone been in a job where they wanted to get through just want to get through the day? And I think we've sort of discussed a bit about that. And there's quite a lot of people who've done that. So I was there many years ago, and I decided to change that. So I did a degree at Bristol University, and then wanted to change. So I'm just going to change my glasses. I wanted to sort of move to a place where we could get, being in a big corporate business, I just found so alienating and so suffocating. So I looked at issues of staff morale, and where staff turnover was a problem, and where there's low engagement. So I wanted to do something about that. So my dad said to me many years ago, he said, "Do you want to join the business and build something completely different?" I said, "Great, I'm on it." So I joined Lawsons, aged about 29. I said it's a family business, fourth generation, and we supply building materials in the London area. We employ about 450 people, and we turn over about 100 million pounds today. So the overview of my talk is I'll talk about the facts that make good business sense. Looking after people makes really good business sense. I'll talk about the values of myself, my roots in Quakerism, and then how we develop the Lawsons values and that impact and outcome. So what's the evidence? So we're a quite fast-growing business within the sector. I'd say in 1993 we had 2 depots, 50 staff, and now we have 17 depots and 450 staff. Our profitability, which the accountants always tell me is important, we run at about 8.4%. Travis Perkins, our nearest competitor, runs at about 6.1%. So some key ratios. Staff turnover is always important to talk about the importance. Don's just talked about the importance of getting good staff. In our competitors, we know it's about 30%. In Lawsons, it's about 13%. And in retail, it's about 45%. So we've got good stats in that. The lowest paid to the highest paid, I'm very committed on not having too big differentials. So in Lawsons, the difference between the lowest paid and the highest paid is a factor of 10. And in the recent Oxfam Global Inequality Report, that figure was 183. So in the issues of pride, 20% of employees are proud to work for their organisation. My report in 2015. And in the recent Lawson survey, where 72% of our staff took part in, that figure was 90%. In trust, the trust index, i.e. employees who trust their organisation, that fell to 52% in 2014. And in Lawsons, that figure stands at 85%. So we have a really high trust and pride in our work. So a bit about my story. So I left university in 82. I did an MBA at Cranfield Business School, got thoroughly bored with KPIs. And then, as Henry's alluded to, I did my master's in 2010. And I focused on a 15,000-word dissertation on love at work. So what would that look like? So that took me a whole year to do, and it was great fun. I looked at Quakerism. I saw the Rowntree story and the Cadburys, and they were, in the 1850s, really revolutionary in introducing great work practices. So they got doctors into the workplace where there were no doctors. They had libraries to teach people how to read, and they built a sense of community, which I think is so important. Cadbury's, as we know, got sold in 2009, and that was interesting for me, the last time they paid any corporation tax. So there were some real ethical issues for me in there. So one of my questions was, if Joseph Rowntree or George Cadbury were alive today, what would it look like? So on with my journey. So I looked at, in my dissertation, questions like, can employee-employer serve each other for the greater good? Can we make a profit? Can we have a social impact? And can we have an environmental impact? So this is very much Lawson's philosophy. We have a triple bottom line view to the sort of impact we want to make. So environmental impact, we've got the first zero-emission HGV lorry arriving in about a month's time, which is a crane, electric crane operated, and a gas-powered vehicle. So we hope to get the mayor along, but we've been really instrumental in pushing that with our bodybuilders. And then I asked the questions, can we focus on each other rather than ourselves? The essence of spiritual love. I think one of my concerns, if you look at business, and particularly, for example, the stories coming out of Hollywood last week, the egos and the narcissisms of certain individuals in business and in the world. So a very important element of that was leadership, which I'll come on to in a minute. But Thomas Aquinas said, there can be no joy of life without the joy of work. So how do we bring that all together? And another interesting quote for me said, Einstein said, the significant problems we face today cannot be solved at the same level of thinker we were when we created them. Work and love define our humanity. So how do we become more human at work? Leadership, I think, is absolutely critical in this, and I looked a lot of myself at this. And interesting, the Benedictine monks of the 6th century looked at a lot about how do we behave as leaders. They had 76 rules, and one of the big ones was about humility. And they had courses every so often at the monastery then, and one of the exercises they had to outdo each other in humility. Can you imagine a leadership course today doing that as a part of mature leadership? You have to be open to mistakes. I think if you look at companies like Enron, you know, there's lots of examples of that where companies just want to cover up what they do. And Margaret Heffman wrote a very good book called Willful Blindness, which talks about how people tend to, as power and prestige comes into their life, they want to block off certain things. It happens in businesses, it happens in countries. You look at 1930s with Nazism. And she interviewed one of the guards at, one of the train guards at Auschwitz. And he said it was a very interesting interview. He was totally aware, he ran all the train networks when in and out of Auschwitz. He was totally aware what was going on, but just didn't want to acknowledge any consequence. So leadership has to really look at who we are and how we behave. So Lord Acton said, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Power feeds on itself if not checked. So if we're all leaders, if we're all in businesses, we will have a responsibility to how do we check ourselves. And with power comes the love. And interesting for me is Martin Luther King said, power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. And Edmund Burke said, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men and women to do nothing. So how do we balance power and love? We have to do both of those within leadership and show the compassion that we do. So, a couple of questions for you. How do you check your own power? And do you have people who do that for you? And secondly, which I'll come on to a bit, is a bit of a curveball one, which you don't have to do, is how to use hospitality within your business to create greater values. And I'll talk a bit about what we did at that in part 2. So give me a few minutes to discuss, and we'll go from there. Okay. So hopefully you've had some ideas about checking your power. I'm just going to tell you a bit about how I check my power. So, and also the other bit is how we got for me, the very important bit, how we got the culture right at Lawsons. And I did this, I started about 5 years ago, because I love to cook. So I decided to hold lunches at my house for my staff. And Henry, I think in the introduction of the book, talks about servant leadership. So the idea was for me to serve my staff a lunch for them to talk about. We call them values lunches. I've been going probably now 6 or 7 years. I get 20 staff who aren't management, who aren't directors. They come round and I cook them lunch. And they can talk about whatever they want. There's no agenda. They can talk about football, whatever. They can talk about work. And it's not compulsory, so they can come and go whenever they want. So I did this, say, about 7 or 8 years ago. And I must admit, it's been absolutely fantastic. It's become a real good talking shop. You can go around to the chairman's house, have lunch, and you can tell him what you really think. My role, which I ask permission of, is just to keep some notes so I can make sure I record what they do and talk about power. The suggestions that would have come up, I needed the power to make sure those things happened within the organisation, which they did. So for me, that part of the power was very good, or very necessary. So I've been doing that for about 5 or 6 years. This next slide shows a picture of some of the staff that turned up for one of the lunches. So it's a whole cross-section of people we have 18 sites across the southeast, so they come from all over, generally one person per site. There's no management or no directors there, and they're waiting for their lunch, as you can see. So what were my observations about this? And I'll talk about my checks on power. One of the things that happened with me, I decided to make myself quite vulnerable in this. I talked about all my difficulties of life, including my divorce. I'm a single parent, I have an alcoholic ex and coping with alcoholism, and my children. So I brought up 4 children of my own. And all that, I think, over time, really lowered the barrier between me and the staff. I was seen as very much a human being who had suffered in various ways, and I think we all suffer in different ways. I think the more we can be open about that, the greater empathy we have with people. And it's interesting, one of the things I note, I don't know what the stats are about divorce, but it's 1 in 3, whatever. So when people go through divorce or single parent issues, I really resonate with myself. I'm a lot more sensitive to those people's issues. So some of the values that are built up around that are, we have a sort of 24-hour counselling service for people, and that's all been driven by, I think, people being much more open at these sort of lunches where all our values are starting to come up. So the values aren't prescriptive, they're all about where people are on their journey in life. So what's great is it all comes up from the staff. A chap called Andy Law, a book called Open Minds, and this quote I think is very important. He says, his reflection is, unless you give up something about yourself and be stripped down, you will never develop or change. The baggage of your past will emerge as the biggest driver in decisions. So making yourself vulnerable, while very challenging, I think has great benefits, because we're all human and we all have issues with our lives. So that for me was a good check on power, and it was a good basis to get values moving up through the company. Other things I noticed, I moved from making and looking for absolute truths about things. We love that in management, don't we? That's the way we're going to go because that's the right decision. My experience now, that's very rarely true. I moved to something to more contextual and negotiated forms of truths, which really brought people on within the organisation. So it was, I think, a really good shift for me. So probably in my 20s and 30s, I was black and white about most stuff. Now I'm much more about negotiated outcomes. Very important. I noticed the dangers of employee silence. I think I'm very aware, when I go around organisations, people want to tell you what you want to hear, and how the trick of leadership is how do you break that barrier down? How do you really get to the truth of what someone's saying? And most people will tell you something they want you to hear or to protect their own self-interest. Quite understandable, but what's the truth? As leadership, you need to ask that. So I also looked at my shadows in terms of power. Anyone not familiar with that? There's lots of psychology about everything that we do has a reaction behind us or has a part of us behind us. So we may want to control things, but there will be issues behind that. It may be for the right reasons, but we may have a history about wanting to control the outcome. And I think you look at, as I said, certain issues in male political leaders at the moment, there's a lot of that going on. So spiritual growth for me was also putting down my ego. So dissolving my power within the organisation was very important, because I didn't want to be led by me, I wanted to be led by everyone. So I became much more consultative in my role, rather than actually giving direction. I think I've only made 2 decisions in the last 10 years. The rest of it has just been an evolving collective movement. So listening more and dissolving my ideas was key. And the other great thing is staff talked about their own difficulties. So when you really get under the veneer, I think, of most people's lives, there's a lot of stuff going on there that is just messy and bloody difficult, to be honest. So people would talk to me a lot more about the challenges of work and what went on outside work. And it's unbelievable what people get up to, from gambling, drinking. It's just extraordinary once you get into the nature of who we are as human. So one of my conclusions is there's tragedy in all our lives, and we're all broken in some way. So good leadership, I think, recognises that, makes yourself vulnerable, creates the empathy, and then you can move forward together. Because life, believe me, I think is quite hard at times. So for me, love at work, in essence, is nothing more, nothing less than mutually supportive environment for the physical, emotional, and mental and spiritual needs of its employees. It's power and passion expressed safely. So for me, that's the biggest challenge of business today. How do you get to that point? So some of the things that have come up, that we do, just a sort of bit more light stuff. So we have big family fun days where we get up to 1,200 people come along. We invite all the families and their friends, and we have a theme park we tend to hire out. We have picnics and all that sort of stuff. All our children of all our staff at Christmas have a big Christmas gathering, and we give out 200, 300 presents to all the kids of anyone under 10. So we have lots of sort of gatherings of people. I say a lot of those ideas come out of these sort of values lunches. So on the sort of family fun day, this is what one of the staff wrote to me about. He said, "Hello Simon, it's Dan Stanley. He's a yard foreman from Belvedere. I would just like to take this opportunity to thank you on behalf of my wife and kids, myself for an amazing day out with my kids, having spoken about it for days, and we made some great memories for this. And I thank you, dear Dad, for putting on such a great day for Lawsons families. Lawsons has changed my life for the better. For myself and my wife feel much better as I'm part of something." Now that's been pretty key in a lot of these lunches that we do. People want to feel part of something that's quite secure. I think it's a very transient world out there. People moving jobs quickly, and if you've got families, that's difficult. He says, "Now I have a future. Not only does this make my home life better, but I can't wait to get to work. Thank you again." Daniel Stokes, who joined us, and he wrote this. Daniel Stokes had only been with us for 2 months, said, "It's amazing. I've never been to the owner's house of someone I work for, let alone have them cook for me." So there was his reflection. And on some of the more tricky stuff, one of the things that's happened in the last few years, we've had illnesses within in the organisations. 2 people have died, and when it's been appropriate, I've followed up with the spouses of the people who have died. And Nigel's wife wrote me this: "I just would like to say thank you for all the support and kindness everyone gave Nigel throughout his illness. It brought Nigel a huge amount of comfort to know everyone was rooting for him to overcome his illness. Nigel loved working for Lawsons, and even though he had not been to the branch since before Christmas, the visits, the phone calls, texts and emails he received made him feel that he's still very much part of the family." So that was some of the more difficult issues. But you have to really face those because it does happen. The more staff you get, the more you realise that sort of thing does go on. So our values and our mission statement is this: is to make work as interesting, satisfying as possible. So have a lot of fun, enjoy it, communicate what makes fun, and what are those values. So the values that hopefully will come up. So these are Lawson family values, and this is very much driven by them. Now these, I know some of these seem quite generic, but they are very much part of what they value. It's not what I feel is important, it's what they feel is important. So for me, that's the most important thing. And I'll just highlight that 4th one, the sense of belonging. I'm absolutely, the more I do these lunches, the more I realise in a fast changing world, 80% of people want security, they want routine, and they want safety, whether it's in family or at work. And I think that's a big question mark for leadership. So that, for me, is one of the most important things. And maybe one more slide. So these are staff benefits that, again, have all come out. Sorry, you can't quite read all of these. But there's a whole range of stuff there that's come out that, again, it's all been driven by the values lunches. We have a profit share scheme as well. So financially, as the company grows, we're very profitable, so we give, I think last year was about 20% of our profit to all the staff. So that was divvied up into a big pot. So everyone's part of a profit share scheme. There's bike to work schemes, death in service, pensions, but these are all the things that they value. So that's all the sort of stuff that we decided to move forward on. And lastly, I'm not going to bother to read it, but this was from an 8-year-old girl who's not very well. So we went to a school and we rebuilt the school playground for her and her friends. And that's, I'll let you read it if you want later, but it's from the heart. And it says what a difference you can make actually if you really push out into community and help people on their way. So that's Lawsons.